Well, while we're on a kick of talking about big 1970s vehicles and just big cars in general, let's talk about this 1976 Cadillac Fleetwood Brougham D'Elegance, the last year for the largest Cadillac ever produced, at least the largest non-limousine Cadillac ever produced. There was the Fleetwood 75 that was produced in 1976 that was a bit bigger than this, and that rode atop 151.5-inch wheelbase. But this regular Fleetwood Brougham D'Elegance rode atop 133-inch wheelbase and measured about 234 inches in overall length. That's just 6 inches shy of 20 feet long. Yes, that's right. This was not the longest overall production car produced. That honor went to the 1973 Chrysler Imperial that measured 1 inch longer than this Fleetwood Brougham. Nonetheless, it's hard to call this vehicle anything but gigantic. This Fleetwood Brougham had been introduced in the 1971 model year, and its styling was updated just a little bit for 1972, then more significantly in 1973 and 1974. And by 1975, it received kind of a full makeover in the front and back. In the front, went to the square headlights as opposed to the round headlights, and the grille for 1976 was a bit different than the 1975 models as well. Out back, the 1976 Fleetwood carried over a theme that began with the 1974 model year, and that was the primary horizontal lamp treatment you can see there below the deck lid. Cadillac had this vertical fin theme going on in the rear of its vehicles for many, many years, but by 1974, there no longer were lamps in the fins themselves. Instead, those lamps were transferred from the fins into that horizontal lamp that you see beneath the deck lid. Not quite sure why Cadillac designers chose to do this. One reason might be that they wanted the overall fin to come to a blade-like termination, which perhaps wouldn't have been possible if a lamp were in there, because the lamp would have to have a certain amount of overall surface area where it would have to display the illumination. Nonetheless, this theme continued for a number of years, beginning in 1974 through 1976 model year, the last year of the Fleetwood. And it was true also on the Eldorados. They had this horizontal lamp theme, but in 1977, the big Eldorado had continued on from the 1976 model year, and it got the lamps put back in its fins for the 1977 and 78 model years. And here you can see a rather unfortunate piece of these mid-1970s Cadillacs, and that is the bumper filler and extension. Notice that the quarter panel terminates, and then there's a separate piece, which is originally a flexible rubber piece that was painted, trimmed out, as you can see here, with this shiny edge to it. Unfortunately, they were not meant to last a long period of time, and by now, if you still have the original fillers on the car, chances are they're beginning to crack and need to be replaced. And the replacements are fiberglass and hard and don't come with that shiny edge on them and have to be fitted. So it's a whole process. If you buy one of these cars and you see the cracked bumper fillers, don't assume that you're just going to be able to buy the fillers off of eBay or someplace and have them painted. Oftentimes they don't fit well, and you're going to be spending a fair amount at a body shop having them fit them, especially fillers like this that not only extend the quarter panel but also extend the area beneath the deck lid. These are very large bumper fillers. The same is true of the mid-70s Buicks that have very, very large bumper fillers, particularly in the rear. At least the Fleetwood would not have large bumper fillers up front, although the Eldorados of this era did. Now let's take a look at the interior of this Fleetwood D'Elegance, and you can see the passenger seat here has the optional 6-way power seat. But the overall theme for the D'Elegance can really be described by a few words, and that is very large square buttons. Lots of these buttons and loose cushion look both on the backrest as well as the bottom bolster of the seat. The D'Elegance packages had begun to be introduced in Cadillac in the 1975 model year, but for 1976 they became more opulent and over the top. And while many recall the Fleetwood Talisman from the 1974 to 76 model years and its poofy crushed velour interior, these D'Elegance models were also very over the top. I don't know how else you could describe that seating. Rumor has it that Cadillac was a bit jealous of Oldsmobile's introduction of the loose cushion interior for the 1972 Regency and kind of copied that theme here. And you certainly can see it and the similarities in the theme between this and the 1972 Olds 98 Regency, which, by the way, Olds continued for years after 1972, even in the new downsized Olds 98 in 1977 and beyond. And while we just showed the front seat, the back seat was similarly opulent with the loose cushion look continuing back there. Notice the top of the door panels is cloaked with that velour, just like the seats. And the overall door panel is made of significantly soft-touch materials, but quite a bit of fake wood, including on the casket handle door pull that you see there. But lots of legroom in the back of these, and there should be with the 133-inch wheelbase. Although it's a bit hard to see in this photo, you can kind of see that the backs of the front seats also have footrests for the rear seat passengers. Let's take a closer look at those because that was a Cadillac Fleetwood Brougham exclusive feature. And here we are. You can see at the bottom of those front seats, the footrests. Those fold up and out of the way as they are here if you wanted to stow them, and they rotate downward if the rear seat passengers wanted a footrest. I think it was a bit more gimmicky than anything else. I don't know how comfortable those footrests are, but it at least gave Cadillac owners something to talk to their friends about. You can also see that while the seats have this very expensive material, they do have some rather cheap seatbelt guides built into the headrest. Those often broke after relatively low mileage, and then the driver or the passenger would have the seatbelt kind of chafing at their neck. The seatbelt retractor on these is built into the roof. It's not a bad design, it's just that those seatbelt guides really were not very robust. And they're designed to swivel back and forth, and after some time, they just wear out. And up front, you have this driver's instrument cluster area. You notice that the bank of warning lights is up above the speedometer area. This is a new instrument panel design that Cadillac introduced for the 1974 model year, and it continued here through 1976 and on the Eldorados through the 1978 model year. One exclusive that was different on the Fleetwood interiors, because everything else was pretty much common with the rest of the Cadillac lineup, was on the door. You notice there's a little reading light at the front edge of the door. That was something that only the Fleetwood Broughams had during this time period. And they did have a little bit different faux wood grain trim, but by and large, the rest of the instrument panel was pretty similar to what was found in the DeVille and even in the Calais series. Here we have the area to the left of the instrument panel, and notice the climate control is something that only the driver can control in these Cadillacs. I personally like that. There's no dual zone climate control in these cars, so I enjoy controlling the climate for the overall car, I must say. Notice that there is an economy position here. That was a position in which the air conditioning compressor would not operate. The air conditioning compressor would operate in all the other settings except the off and economy settings on this climate control. Off also wasn't really off. It kicked the low speed fan on, and that was something that was introduced on GM vehicles with the flow-through ventilation system when they lost the front vent windows. But off, I always thought it was interesting, didn't really mean off. By the way, notice the thumb wheel selector for temperature control in these Cadillacs. That is actually adjustable. So if you feel that your temperature setting is off versus what the output air temperature is in the car, you can stick a putty knife in between that wheel and the top of it, and you'll lock that underlying gear into position, and you can rotate the wheel within, I think, about a 5-degree span just to adjust the reading overall. That is the factory service procedure for it. Notice that this car is also equipped with Twilight Sentinel. You can see that that's on the bottom of the headlight switch at the left there. You turn the switch to the counterclockwise direction if you want to have the headlamp delay on for a longer period of time and on at all. And up top is the Guidematic headlamp controller, automatic headlamp dimming, and you rotate that switch clockwise if you want the headlamps to dim from a further distance away versus near. Also, this car is equipped with the optional delay wipers, which gives you that area on the delay wiper control at the top left there where it says delay and then min and max. If you didn't have the delay wiper control, that would be a missed position. This is my least favorite control of all in these Cadillacs. This little joystick just feels super, super flimsy. And then in order to get the wipers to transition from delay to the low position, you have to crash through the off position you see there at the bottom of the control and then go up into low. Unfortunately, if you do that while the wipers are close to the park position, they park, and then they have to unpark before the low cycle kicks in, something that you really don't want if you're in a light rainstorm and all of a sudden you get to heavy rain. Hence why this is not my favorite control. And last but not least, we have the 500 cubic inch V8 under hood here. This was the last year for Cadillac's 8.2 liter 500 cubic inch V8 that was introduced in the 1970 model year. And amazingly, in 1970, when it was introduced only in the Eldorado, made 400 gross horsepower. And by 1976, just a few years later, it was making 190 net horsepower. That was it from 8.2 liters. It did produce 380 foot-pounds of torque, which wasn't a bad rating, but a modern Chevrolet 5.3 liter V8 also produces about the same amount of torque, although it does so at a higher RPM than this particular engine. I will say, having driven these, that they don't drive like slugs. The engine has plenty of torque to move the car around and go at 80 miles an hour all day long if you want. The passing power is a bit more limited than what one would hope, but this engine is very smooth, reliable, silent. It's really nothing to complain about. And even the gas mileage on these on the freeway really isn't terrible. I've had one, and I used to get about 14 miles per gallon, which I think is pretty incredible given how unaerodynamic this car is, with a 3-speed automatic, non-lockup torque converter, and an 8.2 liter V8 under hood. Notice Cadillac always put on these engines the air conditioning compressor in the middle of the V that helped minimize vibrations. They were the only GM division to do that. And if you really want to nitpick, this is a 2,900-mile car, and it still has the original spark plug wires. They were gray, just like this, but somebody has routed them incorrectly. The spark plug wire for the back cylinder there should actually be in a lower setting on that spark plug wire guide and cross over the other wires. So if you ever see one and you want to see the factory routing, here's what it looks like for reference. So you can poke fun at one of your friends who owns one of these vehicles that's restored it incorrectly. Hope you enjoyed this video on the 1976 Fleetwood Brougham D'Elegance. If you did, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and check out the video thumbnails at bottom left and right for some suggestions for you. Thanks again for watching.